The small town on the bank of the Kama River was drowning in the fragrance of lilacs. The end of May was warm and sunny. The nightingales were trilling in the brook, and the water in the river was blue. Like a mirror, it reflected the bridges connecting the banks, the houses rising on the steep slopes, the forests hugging the outskirts. After a long winter, the city came alive and blossomed. Lillian and Paul were sitting on the shore, eating cabbage pies. Paul had run away from the orphanage the morning before to the market, where the peddlers who pitied him always gave him some odd jobs. Most often he was entrusted with unloading cars with goods, and for this they gave him some money, which he used to buy food and other things. And in the orphanage today they handed out certificates and documents for graduation from the institution. The principal was screaming like a madwoman.
"Where's Smith? Where'd he go again? Who's going to sign his papers for me?" Lillian knew Paul was in the market. After the presentation of the certificates, she was supposed to wait for him on the riverbank. The boy didn't stay long. As soon as Lillian had settled down on the grass, he was there.
"Here, I brought pies and juice." He handed the food to his friend. "I didn't go to lunch," she said, taking a bite out of a cabbage pie. "I'm sick of their food, and I hope I'll forget about those stupid empty soups and muffins very soon." "Did you decide to go into modeling after all? You haven't changed your mind?" Paul asked. "They say they shoot for magazines and show their clothes during the day, and at night they go to restaurants with old and fat men, and maybe even sleep with them." "It's better than being a plasterer on a building site." Lillian finished her pie and drank the juice from the box. "You and me, Paul, we can't expect any favors from life. If we don't take care of ourselves, no one will bring us anything on a silver platter." "That's right," Paul sighed, agreeing with his friend. She was always right about her and Lillian. The boy obeyed her orders without reservation and did whatever she wanted. Once he had even stolen a blouse for Lillian at a clothing store. Oh, and had to run then. The guard chased him for several blocks, yelling "Freeze, I'll shoot you" when he got away from him and hid behind the garages. Paul laughed to himself. What was he going to shoot with? Was it a finger? Lillian liked the blouse very much and wore it for a month. A boy and a girl grew up in an orphanage. Paul had a mother, but she was always drinking, and, in the end, she was deprived of her parental rights, and her son was sent to the orphanage. At first his mother came to the fence to see him, but then she disappeared, and Paul did not want to see her. Lillian didn't remember her parents. She had been in the orphanage when she was very young, and today, after receiving her certificate, she was shown the documents that showed that Lillian's mother had abandoned her in the hospital. As it happened, the boys had become friends a few years ago. The orphanage kids jumped on Paul's new friend, and Lillian shooed them away in 2 minutes, threatening to punch anyone who came near her friend. No one else touched Paul. Lillian wasn't afraid of anyone. Tomorrow they will leave the orphanage as free men. An independent adult life will begin. How wonderful, Paul, that this prison is over. The girl rejoiced. Tomorrow they will give us more cards with the money we have accumulated over the years. "When do you think they'll give you an apartment as an orphan?" Paul asked. "I don't even think about it. You'll get it from them." "No, you have to take everything into your own hands. To do everything yourself," Lillian replied. "I'm planning to hook up with some rich daddy and get money from him." "What about me?" Paul pouted, offended. He'd been in love with Lillian for a long time, and they'd even had it when they'd escaped from the orphanage through a hole in the fence 2 weeks ago. Then on the beach, the guy had confessed his love to her, and she'd unbuttoned the shirt on his chest and put her hand on his. "Can you hear it beating?" Paul, almost choked with excitement, kissed Lillian's breasts, her neck, and she didn't chase him away, didn't stop him. Noticing that Paul took offense at her words, Lillian laughed. "Silly, you'll always be with me, but we'll have to live on something." The couple walked towards the orphanage. They were going to spend the last night in the institution, and then they would start their independent, adult life. The next day in the courtyard of the orphanage, the pupils, graduates, tutors, director, even the cooks and the janitor gathered. Everyone was saying goodbye. The boys promised that they would write and call, and the adults wished them a good journey. After buying train tickets to the capital, Paul and Lillian sat on a bench and ate ice cream.
"We should buy a newspaper with ads," the girl said.
"Why?" Paul asked. "Do you think we'll be welcome there, given apartments and jobs?" She grinned wryly. "You have to do everything with your own hands and head." Lillian jabbed a finger at her friend's forehead. "I'll be right back," he said, and headed for the newsstand. Paul returned a few minutes later, handing her some newspapers with advertisements. "Let's see what we've got here." Lillian started flipping through the print edition. "Look at the prices, Paul. Look at them. You can't get a decent apartment with our pennies." "You have to look for a job first," Paul said. "I wonder where you'll find her if you don't know how to do anything, have no specialty." "You can be a courier. There is money paid every day and education is not necessary." "Yes," agreed Lillian. "Here's the paper. Look for a job as a courier." The loudspeaker announced their train. The boys put the newspapers in their bags and went to board the train. When the train moved, they looked out the window at the station, houses and stores floating away. "Goodbye," Hole said, Lillian solemnly. "Hello, new life." They arrived in the capital in the morning. The big city was noisy, humming like a beehive. People were hurrying somewhere, running, not paying attention to each other. The air was torn by the noise of traffic. Paul was confused at first by the number of people, but Lillian was already dragging him somewhere. "What are you doing here?" "In the middle of nowhere," she scolded Paul. "Come on, let's go find a cafe. We should get some breakfast and call about a place to stay." They walked along the street, occasionally bumping into passers-by in a hurry. At some point, Paul wondered whether they had done the right thing in coming to the capital, for it seemed very inhospitable and alien to him. But he did not speak of his doubts to Lillian, for she would chase him away, saying, "Go back, you whiner." He knew her character too well. If she decided to achieve something, she would definitely do it. Half an hour later, they were sitting at a table in a half-empty cafe, drinking coffee with fragrant buns. Lillian laid out the newspaper with the advertisements for rented apartments that she had traced with a felt-tip pen on the train and began to make phone calls to the owners. Eventually, she was able to reach one of the landlords, wrote down the address, and promised to be there soon. After a couple of hours, they reached the advertised place on the outskirts of town. The house where they were to live was an old, dilapidated wooden hut. "Not a palace," of course, Lillian said disappointedly. She knew they couldn't rent a good apartment with their money, but she was impressed by what she saw before her. The room the landlady showed them was quite tolerable, clean, and the simple furniture was very useful. There was a sofa in the corner, an old TV set opposite it, and a table in the center. The clothes closet was a little shaky, but that wasn't Lillian's main concern right now. The landlady was asking for 6 months' rent in advance. "What if we decide to move out early?" the girl asked the woman. "I'll pay you back minus 1 month. It's like compensation, because I'll have to look for tenants again," she replied. "Okay, we agree," Lillian sighed. She believed that soon things would get better and they would move to a more comfortable place. "Paul, settle up." The boy gave the landlady the money and she left. Lillian walked around the room, looked in the closet. On the shelf were several sets of linens, pillows, and a blanket. She ran her finger along the tabletop. There was no dust. Apparently, the landlady had prepared and cleaned up before they arrived. Putting her arms around Paul's neck and looking him straight in the eyes, she asked, "So how do you like our nest?" "It's fine. The main thing is that you're there for me," he replied. They spent the rest of the day and night in bed, enjoying each other's closeness. Now they didn't have to hide or run away from their teachers to be alone together. As dawn broke outside the window, Lillian sent Paul to find a store where they could buy something to eat. He returned with a loaf of bread and a stick of sausage. After breakfast, they went for a walk. "I need to buy some decent clothes," said Lillian. "It would be a shame to go to a modeling agency in my clothes. They wouldn't hire me." "Are you sure you'll even be accepted there?" the guy asked. "You're not a model after all." "I'm sure, and don't confuse me. There's a clothing store over there. Let's go in." They entered a beautiful room. Lillian's eyes widened at the sheer number of beautiful dresses, suits, and blouses on the mannequins. She ran to the hangers, pulling out one thing and another. But when she looked at the price tags, her eyes went wide. "Are you sure you want to buy something from us?" she heard a woman's voice. "We have a very expensive brand store." Lillian looked at the tall girl in the white blouse and black skirt who was looking at the girl with her lips pressed together. "Let's get out of here," Lillian said to the guy, and they walked out of the store. "Did you see that?" "No, have you seen it? Those aren't prices, they're just a bunch of numbers." "Wow, someone buys a skirt for several tens of thousands of rubles."
They decided that they should find the nearest clothing market. The prices there were certainly more democratic, and beautiful things could be found not only in the store. Lillian learned from passers-by that the market was a few bus stops away, so they easily found the market stalls and bought a few dresses, shoes, and some cosmetics.
Her first day in the capital was a little disappointing, and she had a faint shadow of doubt as to whether she would be able to accomplish what she had dreamed of. But she quickly dismissed her worries. Lillian and Paul had already been living in the capital for 2 months, and the girl still couldn't find a modeling agency that would hire her. Most of them wouldn't even let her in. As she watched long-limbed beauties walk through the doors, she thought enviously, "Well, I'll be walking around here soon." Paul worked every day from morning till night as a food delivery man. He came home tired, fell to the sofa. Sometimes he didn't even have the strength to eat. But the money he earned was quite decent, enough for food and Lillian's whims. The girl used to go to the market, again and again buying beautiful things, jewelry, handbags. "Lillian, why don't you get a proper job?" Paul asked her. "We need waitresses in our cafe." "I'm a waitress?" The girl was indignant. "Are you crazy? That's not why I came here." All right, Paul reassured her. He knew that if he insisted, Lillian would make a scene and not speak to him for days. One day the girl was wandering aimlessly around the city while Paul was at work. Suddenly she saw an ad at a bus stop recruiting girls for photo shoots and clothing demonstrations and a phone number. Lillian quickly wrote it down in her cell phone and dialed it. "I'm listening," a female voice replied. "I'm on an AD ... about a photo shoot." "Drive up to the address," a woman's voice dictated where to go. Lillian remembered and headed for the bus stop. An hour later, she was standing at the entrance of a 5-story building almost in the center of the city. The door to the entryway was closed. She dialed the phone again, and a woman's voice in the receiver gave her the combination of numbers for the intercom. An hour later, rushing home, she wanted to tell Paul the news as soon as possible. At last she was in luck, Lillian thought. This was exactly the kind of job she had dreamed of. Climbing up to the 3rd floor, she found the door with the right number and pressed the bell button. The door was opened by a tall blonde man. "Lillian?" he asked. "Yeah," chuckles. "Come on," and he let the girl inside. Finding herself in a luxuriously furnished, spacious hallway, the girl was confused at first. But the guy told her, "Follow me." The living room the blonde man led Lillian into was huge. There were paintings on the walls and a woman in her 40s sitting on a large leather sofa. She was elegantly dressed, well-groomed, and very beautiful. Lillian noted the fancy manicure and gold jewelry. "Hello," the woman said, smiling with bright red lips. "So you're Lillian, and you're looking for modeling work?" "Yes, I'm looking." Lillian, who was usually not shy, suddenly felt like a small, defenseless girl. "Turn around. Now walk." Lillian did as the woman ordered. "Well, sit down." The girl crouched on the edge of the chair. "My name is Ellen, and I'm the owner of all this." The woman made a gesture with her hand and looked around the room. "My girls make good money. You want to make money, don't you?" "I want to." "Then I'll offer you a job, but don't refuse right away. Think it over. We're a reputable agency, not a small business. We only work with wealthy, representative clients. Do you understand?" Lillian nodded, though the more Ellen spoke, the more questions she had. It is my girl's responsibility to show up at the photographer's house occasionally. He takes pictures for the portfolio, which allows us to gain new clients, to socialize with the men who come here, to take them out on outings, and to accompany them on business and pleasure trips. Have you heard anything about an escort service? Approximately.
Ellen smiled again.
If one of our clients wants to be accompanied by a beautiful girl, we provide such a service. Is that clear? Yeah, chuckles. How do you like this job? The woman asked, tilting her head slightly and scrutinizing Lillian's expression. I think I can manage, the girl said hesitantly. I think you'll do fine too. You're a commuter, right? How do you know? Lillian was surprised. She certainly hadn't told Helene that she had come from the Urals. I can tell by you, she grinned. Lillian's cheeks flamed. She felt ashamed, as if Ellen had accused her of something terrible and shameful. Don't worry, the woman reassured her. Most of my girls come from the periphery. They will teach you everything. At that moment, a brunette in a pink silk robe entered the room, followed by a respectable man in a suit and tie. Ellen, I must take my leave, he said, kissing his hostess's hand. Bill, honey, and I thought we'd have a drink afterwards. Talk about this, and that. Ellen smiled at her client. Alas, business, the man's expression became feignedly sad. But I am, as always, pleased with your reception. Samantha is lovely. The blonde man who met Lillian at the door escorted the guest out, and the girl in the pink robe plopped into the chair across from Lillian. This is the new girl. Helene nodded at Lillian, lighting a cigarette. Bring her up to speed with the girls and dress her up. It's a bit of a kokaz. Good, Samantha said, also smoking, squinting at Lillian from head to toe.
Upon learning that Lillian had found a job, Paul was at first overjoyed. That's wonderful news. He picked up the girl and started circling the room.
But when the guy found out that Lillian was going to date various rich men, he was relieved. He didn't like the idea. What if one of them drags you to bed? He asked, looking out the window. What of it, Paul? The girl answered as if nothing had happened. It is possible to be a little patient for the sake of a prosperous life. Lillian walked over to him and hugged him. You want us to have money, don't you? An apartment of our own, so that we could afford to vacation at the seaside and even go abroad. Paul was silent. Lillian got angry. Fuck you, Paul. I want to live normally, not chew cheap sausage and black bread for dinner. You'll never be able to provide that on your caterer's salary. I'll get another job, the boy tried to object. Which one? Be realistic. We're 17 years old. There's no education and there won't be any. No prospects. Paul, sweetheart, don't be naughty. Things are going to change soon. I have a plan, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it happen. For you and me. Her words calmed Paul a little. He was ready to turn a blind eye to everything, as long as Lillian was near him, as long as she loved him. He had no one else but her, and he wanted to trust his friend. Paul and Lillian had been living in the capital for a year. Nothing had changed in the guy's life. He was still running around the city, delivering pizzas, rolls, and other food to addresses. No matter how hard he tried to save at least a little, there was still no money. It was only enough for the bare necessities and to pay for his room. Lillian's life was in full swing. She changed a lot, dressed well, went to restaurants with different men, and spent her free time more often in the company of friends on the shop floor, not with Paul. It upset him, but Lillian said it's the right thing to do, trust me. That day she was going to accompany some other big shot. Who is it this time? Paul asked, watching her friend fidgeting in the mirror, fixing her hair and applying makeup. I don't know, some businessman. She dismissed her lips with red lipstick. Another owner of factories, newspapers, steamships, a fat married man who is ashamed to bring out his own wife and hires a girl from the outside. What are you getting so worked up about? Lillian slipped her feet into her high-heeled shoes and stared critically at her reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, her cell phone vibrated on the table. "Lillian, where are you?" came Ellen's voice. "I'm on my way." "Hurry up," Lillian heard her hostess get irritated. "I'll run, my love," she said to Paul, kissed him on the cheek, and walked out the door. There was a car with yellow checkers on the roof waiting for her downstairs. "Hurry up, please. I'm in a big hurry," Lillian said to the driver as she settled into the back seat. A client was already waiting for her in Helene's apartment. He was sitting in a soft leather armchair, drinking coffee.
"This is inexcusable," Lillian, the hostess, said sternly as she entered the living room. "Why do you allow yourself to be late?"
"I'm sorry," Lillian said, but the man interrupted her. "It's all right. No one will notice we're late," he said, looking carefully at his future companion. "My name is Wilson." "Lillian," the girl replied. "I'm ready. Can we go?" Two luxurious black cars were waiting for them at the entrance. The door of one of them opened. Lillian and Wilson got into the back seat, and the car started. A security car followed. The man was silent. Lillian thought he was angry and dared not utter a word. She had never seen this client before. Wilson looked to be about 50. He looked solid. "I wonder what he does for a living," Lillian thought, looking out the car window. The car stopped at the open gate. The driver hurriedly opened the door and gave Lillian his hand. When she looked around, she saw a luxurious residence with a huge territory. On the large lawn, couples strolled leisurely, beautifully dressed men and women talking, sipping champagne. "Shall we?" Wilson said. Lillian took him under her arm, and they walked along the path. During a year of working for Ellen, the girl had learned how to behave properly at such events. Wilson was always talking to someone, and she only smiled and followed him with an invisible shadow. Approaching another couple, the man introduced his companion. "Meet Lillian." "You are charming, Lillian." "Wilson is always lucky for young, beautiful girls," said an acquaintance of her client, kissing Lillian's hand. "I don't know why you haven't married yet, Wilson." "I'm married to my job, you know," Wilson replied with a laugh. "I'm married to my job, you know," Wilson said, laughing. "And for nothing. At your age, you should be raising an heir. Who will you hand over your business to?" Wilson sighed, smiled, and answered uncertainly. "And that's the question, ... You're right, buddy." Lillian decided to keep the men talking. "And I think Wilson is the right age to marry and have an heir." The men looked at her in surprise. "Yes? And why is that, may I ask?" her client's buddy asked with interest. "First, he is an accomplished man who does not have to think about what to feed his child tomorrow or how to pay for his education. Secondly, he is in great shape to spend time with his family, go on a trip, go skiing, for example. And third..." "And what's the third thing?" Wilson asked. "And thirdly, you have a lot of life experience that you can share with your children. You must agree that such a father is much better for a child than an inexperienced young man who has barely graduated from college." The men smiled. They clearly liked Lillian's arguments. "Your companion is not only incredibly charming, but also smart," Wilson the buddy praised Wilson's choice.
Later, when they were alone, the man told Lillian,
"You're holding up well. A lot of experience." "I don't get it," she replied, taking the champagne glass from his hands. "How long have you been working for Ellen? Have you had any experience?" "Are you trying to hurt me now, Wilson?" Lillian made a hurt look. "If you want to know, I'll tell you. I've only been working for Ellen for a year. And what I said is true. I really believe that age is no barrier to a man starting a family. It's a woman who has to think about having a baby and not getting old. But a man's fatherhood is beautiful, even at your age." "Do you really think so?" Wilson asked.
Lillian said nothing, but looked straight into his eyes. She saw in his gaze a pang of longing, as if something was troubling him. That's the look of abandoned dogs who look hopefully at passers-by, waiting for a sugar bone. Wilson looked at her with that look. It seemed strange to the girl, She had had enough experience with rich men, and more often than not their eyes threw lightning bolts of lust, greed, envy. Many of them were rude, others were indifferent.
And there was sadness in Wilson's eyes. A week later, Ellen summoned Lillian to her house. "There's a job for you tonight," she said. "Which one?" "Remember that client you went out of town with last week?" "Wilson?" Of course I remember. Lillian remembered a man with a slight gray in his thick dark hair and sad eyes. So Helene continued, "Tonight at 8 o'clock he'll be waiting for you at the restaurant on the seafront. He wants you to have dinner with him. It's strange, he's been using our services for years and he's never ordered dinner with girls, usually just an escort. Well, whatever. So be ready and don't be late." I got it. Going to the restaurant with Wilson, Lillian wore a strict dark blue dress and black high-heeled shoes. She deliberately chose business rather than evening style. She tied her hair in a bun at the back of her head and took another look at her reflection in the mirror. Lillian took her purse and was about to leave when Paul burst through the door. "Lillian, trouble. I've been robbed," he shouted. "Oh my God, Paul again?" "We have to leave or the owner of the cafe will put me on the meter." The guy was hysterical, running around the room. "How did that work out?" Lillian asked. "Two men attacked me in a back alley, took my bag and all my money for the day." "What do we do, Lillian?" "Look, maybe you should change jobs. Last week you lost your paycheck because you spent half a day looking for an address and delivered a cold pizza to a customer. The day before yesterday you left your bag on the train, and today you got mugged. Maybe you're going in the wrong direction." There was a sneer in Lillian's voice, and Paul caught it. It hurt him. Lillian was doing well, almost getting where she wanted to be. At least she wasn't counting every penny. She was riding cabs instead of stuffy buses, and her closet was full of her clothes. And he, Paul, still wore the same jeans he'd come to the Capitol in a year ago. He wanted to say something hurtful in response to Lillian's bullying, but he couldn't think of any argument he could use to justify his failures. He sat down on the couch and wrapped his arms around his head, moaning softly. He sat down on the couch and wrapped his arms around his head, moaning softly. "All right, don't be mad," she stroked his head, trying to calm him down, then opened her purse and pulled out several large bills. "Here you go. Is this enough?" Paul took the money and counted it.
"Not enough, of course, but thanks for that."
"That's it, sweetie. I've got to run," Lillian said, heading for the exit. "I'll be late. Don't miss me." As she got into the cab, she looked out the window. The light was on in their room. Paul was getting sullen. He had never been a strong-willed man. Paul was the weak link in her and Lillian's pairing. On the one hand, she was tired of carrying him around. But on the other hand, Lillian loved Paul. They had been together since they were children. "Let's go," she said to the driver, and he turned the key in the ignition. The doorman obligingly opened the restaurant door for Lillian. She entered the lobby, went to the mirror, and then headed for the lounge. "I'm expected," she said to the girl at the entrance. "Yes, please come in, I'll show you out."
The music was playing quietly in the restaurant. Most of the tables were empty, just a few couples at different ends of the room chatting sweetly over dinner.
"Hello," Lillian Wilson greeted the girl. "Hello," the girl replied. He helped her to sit down, setting up a chair, and himself settled opposite. "Champagne?" the man asked. "I didn't know what you prefer, so I ordered it first." "I'd love a red dry wine," Lillian said. The man gestured to the waiter, who brought the wine and the menu. "Order whatever you like. Don't be shy," Lillian Wilson suggested. "I liked you the last time we met, and I wanted to spend the evening with you." "Thank you, I'm very pleased to hear that," Lillian replied. The waiter brought the order, and as he placed the plates on the table, there was a slight pause in the conversation. Lillian looked at the man across the table. He was dressed rather plainly. The fact that the evening carried no solemnity or business reasons was evident from the fact that Wilson had come to the meeting without a tie. "I really liked what you said last time about family and that it is never too late to start a family," the man continued. I must admit that your words struck a chord with me, and I've been thinking a lot. No, I was just giving my opinion. I probably should have kept my mouth shut. Lillian smiled her charming smile. They say it's best for women not to enter into men's conversations. To stupid women, I might add, Wilson said with a smile. You're a very smart girl, in my opinion. Thank you for the compliment. Tell me, Lillian, can we meet with you, say, as friends? It was obvious that Wilson was having a hard time choosing words. The thing is, I'm always busy at work, and sometimes I'd like to spend an evening in pleasant company. I don't mind if our meetings don't interfere with my schedule, Lillian replied. You misunderstand me. Lillian. Wilson sipped wine from his glass and continued. I want you to pay attention only to me from this day forward. Does Ellen know what kind of proposal you're making to me? Lillian asked. I don't think you need to explain the specifics of my job. I'll take care of Ellen, don't worry. She'll get a nice payoff for you. A payoff? Lillian felt like a slave in a stupid soap opera. Are you buying me? Not at all. Lillian. Wilson, seeing the girl's growing discontent and incomprehension, hastened to reassure her. You can refuse my company at any time, but I hope very much that we will become good friends. He poured wine into her glass and raised his own. What do you think of my proposal? We will spell out in the contract the amount you will receive each month, all official. I must think about it, said Lillian. She realized that if she agreed to Wilson's proposal so easily and quickly, her attractiveness in his eyes might be underestimated. During a year of living in the capital, she had learned that men had to be kept on a leash, so that they started to burn with the thought of her and did not lose interest after the first meeting. Think. Wilson looked at Lillian's plate and exclaimed, I'm talking to you, eat please. That's what we came here for. After dinner, the man ordered the driver to take Lillian home. Handing her a business card with his phone number, he told her, Be sure to call me, Lillian. I'll be waiting. On the way home, the girl thoughtfully looked out the window at the cars, houses, and stores running past. It seemed to her that she was on the right path. She imagined her ultimate goal to find a rich daddy and live off him without denying herself anything. Lillian imagined telling Paul, but when she entered the room, she found him asleep. There were 2 vodka bottles on the table. The guy was drunk and asleep, sprawled out on the couch. What a jerk. I shouldn't have given him the money, Lillian thought. She was determined to talk to Paul, so she woke him up, shook him by the shoulders, slapped his face with the palm of her hand. The boy mumbled and finally opened his eyes. Are you out of your mind? He said unhappily. You don't see the man is resting. I see, Lillian said angrily. Where did you get so tired, I wonder? At work. Paul rolled onto his other side. And anyway, I'm stressed. Lillian brought her face close to his and kissed his cheeks, neck, lips. She slowly unbuttoned his shirt and started on the belt of his jeans. And I have good news, she whispered, breathing into his ear. Which ones? Paul Post had come to his senses and was already putting his arms around Lillian's waist, pulling her close to him. The good ones.
You betcha. The couple ducked under the blanket, and the old couch creaked with the movement of their bodies.
And then, lying in bed, Lillian told Paul everything that had happened that evening. So I don't get it. You're not going out with men to restaurants and events anymore? Paul asked. I will, but only with one man, she said, lighting a cigarette. You know, I think he has a crush on me. What do you mean, a fuse? He's old, isn't he? I don't get it. Well, he's not that old, if you ask me. 50 is no age at all for a man, and he's not 50 yet. So what? Can he still do it in bed? Paul persisted, feeling a pang of jealousy. How should I know? I haven't slept with him. I think you're missing the point. If I fall in love with this rich guy, make him crazy about me, maybe he'll marry me. And that's a whole different position and money. It'll be different for me, you know. What about me? Paul asked. If he marries you, we'll have to break up. You don't have to. Lillian stroked his hair and ran her finger across his forehead. We'll date, just not live together. Paul got out of bed and went to the window. It was raining outside. The only lantern in the yard illuminated the front yard. In the beam of it, Samantha could clearly see streams of water running off the roof. It would soon be fall. The thought of summer coming to an end brought sadness to the boy. He realized that his relationship with Lillian could end like this. What would he be left with? Alone, in a strange city, without a normal job and without money. No, he wasn't ready for that. Lillian, let's not change anything, he asked quietly. Let's leave everything as it is. Go out to restaurants with your men, work for that Helene of yours, but don't think about looking for a husband. Yeah, the girl said wryly. It'll be a year, 5 years, 10 years, and then no one will want me at all. Men want a young body, and they are ready to do anything for young girls. I feel like we're going to lose each other if you go through with your plan. Foolish. Luck is coming my way, and you're being cranky. Lillian got up from the couch, wrapped a sheet around herself, and walked over to Paul. She hugged him, caressed him like a small, upset child. She thought to herself that she had told him everything for nothing. A few days later, she called Wilson at the number on the business card. I agree, she said into the phone. Wilson Brown was not an oligarch or a tough businessman. At one time, he managed to invest profitably, and after receiving a profit, he opened a company for the production of paint and varnish materials. Over time, it became quite profitable, and Wilson built a small factory, thereby expanding the production area. A worker by nature, he led a rather modest lifestyle and did not throw money around. His father had taught him that. Wilson's parents were simple factory workers. They had a heart for their son and tried to give him the best of everything. To achieve your goal in life, you have to study a lot, his father told his 12-year-old son. Only education allows you to go to another level and not to be stuck, as my mother and I were, at a machine. His father was the absolute authority for his son. Wilson trusted and obeyed him in everything. Therefore, he entered the institute, which pleased the elder Brown very much. My son is ahead, his father used to brag to the men in the yard when they gathered to play a game or two of dominoes. He'll learn, he'll become a man. Maybe he'll become a boss. By the time Wilson was graduating from college, his mother had become pregnant. She was in her 40s and the pregnancy came as a surprise. The mother and father were at a complete loss, not knowing what to do. On the one hand, a child is happiness in the house, and Wilson's parents always wanted to have a large family. On the other hand, the mother was at an age when pregnancy and childbirth could be dangerous to her health. For a whole week they agonized, consulted with doctors, reasoned whether they would be able to raise a second child before old age. My gynecologist says I'm perfectly healthy, my mother told my father after her visit to the doctor. But the cardiologist has doubts. But I can have a cesarean, so they told me. All right, dear, let's say there are no health reasons, but we are not young anymore. When we take the child to the 1st grade, we'll be in our 60s. What do you say to that? My father hesitated. What's the big deal? Who cares how old we are? You know, I don't think I'll be able to play soccer or race with the kid anymore. The father imagined his youngest child calling him to play ball and him sitting on a bench with a stick and laughed. It's all excuses. My wife waved her hand at him. The main thing is that we want this child. The decision was made. The mother was ill during the whole pregnancy. Almost every month she was in labor. The daughter was literally suffered by her. But when Amelie was born, Wilson's parents were happy. Wilson, can you imagine when you have a child, it will be an uncle or aunt to Alinka, and it will be younger than your sister? Is that funny? Asked the father to his son, watching his wife feeding his daughter from a bottle. Ridiculous, Wilson replied. Indeed, he could already have children himself. But Wilson didn't have a girlfriend. He spent all his time studying, and at the stage of writing his diploma, he hardly went out at all. The parents' 2-bedroom was now noisy and restless. The parents kept Emily in their arms. As soon as she returned from work, her father would run to his daughter, giving her mother at least a little rest. If the father overtime, Wilson drove with his sister. The mother often asked him to take the baby for a walk while she did the laundry or cooked dinner. The little girl grew up funny and very bright. They say that late children are distinguished by their intelligence and talent. Looking at Amelie, it could be believed. The girl practiced rhythmic gymnastics, went to music school, sang incredibly beautifully. Her parents couldn't get enough of her. Amelie herself was more drawn to Wilson. The difference between them was more than 20 years, but Wilson tried to give time to his sister. When Amelie was 10 years old, her father became seriously ill. In just 6 months, he burned out from cancer. Wilson's mother lasted only 3 months. She could not survive the death of her beloved husband and passed away after him. Wilson and Amelie were left alone. Now the cares for the upbringing of the girl fell on the older brother. Wilson by that time was already almost 35. He never had a family. All his time was taken up by business and Amelie. After the death of her parents, Wilson's sister began to study badly, abandoned music and rhythmic gymnastics. Now she spent all her time in the yard with her friends. Wilson was concerned that his sister had not chosen the best company. Most of the boys were hooligans, drinking beer, not shy of adults, smoking and singing songs late at night, keeping the residents quiet. He repeatedly told Amelie how friendship with such types ended, but she didn't listen to him. The girl left the house again and again for the courtyard, and one day she left and did not return. After coming home from work, Wilson rushed to look for the girl. He looked all over the neighborhood but could not find her anywhere. He went to the police, but they told him that she was of age and could go out as much as she wanted. "She'll walk. Your sister will come," said the insolent captain in the front office. She always came home. It never happened to her, Wilson worried. "She'll be back this time too," the policeman told him, and advised him to go home. "When you get there, she'll be waiting for you. You'll see." The captain turned out to be a bad seer. Amelie wasn't home. She didn't show up on the 3rd day, and she didn't show up a week later. Then Wilson was finally allowed to file a missing persons report. To his regret, he suddenly realized that he knew neither her friends nor their addresses. He was too busy to delve into his sister's life. Where she could have been for so long, he couldn't guess either. The policeman was throwing up his hands, saying, "How are we going to look for her if we don't know anything about her?" But he took the photograph and the statement. At work, the man couldn't think about anything but his sister's disappearance. "Maggie, get Sam for me, please," Wilson said to the secretary. "All right, Wilson." A few minutes later, a tall, statuesque man entered the office of the director of the company. Sam was Wilson's right-hand man and head of security. The director trusted him like he trusted himself. "Any news about Amelie?" Sam asked. "No, that's just it. There's no sign of him." "Wilson, we need to hire detectives," the assistant said. "If she'd been stolen for ransom, we'd have had a claim by now." "Agreed," the director replied briefly. "Get on with it." "I got it." Sam walked out the door, and Wilson thought, even in such a huge city, a person must leave some trace. A girl can't just disappear without anyone knowing anything about her. Maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Wilson's guards had been searching for the boss's sister for the last few days, checked airports and train stations, but Amelie never left the city by those routes. Interviewed bus drivers at bus stations and cab drivers. No one's seen her. Tracked her cell phone, but it was turned off. Amelie disappeared without a trace, as if she'd never been in Wilson's life. One day, coming in with another report that the girl could not be found, a detective brought in by Sam told Wilson, "Enough time has passed. I suggest you start the procedure to change your status from missing to deceased. Please accept my regrets." "She's not dead," Wilson shouted. He was infuriated by the detective's calmness. This man didn't know Amelie. She was a very cheerful girl. She loved life. And this man so easily wants Wilson to get a death certificate for his sister. "Get out of here. Why, I paid you so much money." Wilson didn't want to believe and didn't believe that Amelie was dead. In a big city, there are many temptations and also many dangers. A person could easily be kidnapped here, not to ask for ransom, but to be sold into slavery, for example. She may have lost her memory, after all, and may now be living with kind people who don't know anything about her and can't contact her relatives. Anything but death, that's what Wilson thought. He ordered his security detail to stay on the lookout for people at all times, even when they weren't at work, maybe Emily would catch his eye. But as the years went by, there was no news of the girl. Wilson was given his sister's death certificate. With the appearance of Lillian in Wilson's life, the man suddenly felt that he was ready to change his way of life, ready to learn to enjoy every day. He liked the girl. She reminded him of his sister who disappeared 10 years ago. A little plain, but with character. She was not stupid. She knew how to be in public, easily kept up a conversation, and dressed tastefully. After her phone call, he decided he'd had enough of being a recluse. Wilson wanted to get to know Lillian better. Even though they were almost 30 years apart, he was interested in her. Wilson called Sam to him. Find out everything about this girl, he asked his assistant. Where she was born, who her parents were, where she studied, what she lives and breathes. Everything. Got it, will do, Sam replied. An hour later, he returned to the principal's office with a complete dossier on Lillian. Did you find anything? The director asked hopefully. Wilson knew that almost nothing was impossible for Sam. He'd get to the bottom of anything, find all the information he could. To tell you the truth, it's nothing interesting, Sam replied. Tell me about it. Born in a small town. Her mother left her in the maternity hospital right after the birth. The girl ended up in a baby home, then in an orphanage. A year and a half ago, she graduated from the institution and came to the capital with a boyfriend who was brought up there. Are they in a relationship? Wilson interrupted Sam. I don't think so, replied the assistant, but they live in one room, rented on the outskirts of the city. They have an address. The orphanage said they'd been friends for years, since they were children. I suppose that's why they decided to go and conquer the capital together. Let's move on. Wilson looked out the window, listening intently to Sam. She has no relatives. You know the rest, works at Ellen's escort agency. That's all. And any black spots in his biography? Wilson asked. Any questionable connections, drugs, priors? I didn't find anything to be suspicious. Okay, you can be free. The man sat down in the chair at his desk. There was something about this girl that appealed to him, but he couldn't figure out what it was. We'll wait and see, Wilson thought, and dialed Lillian's number. Hello, Lillian. Let's meet and spend a pleasant evening together, the man suggested. Lillian agreed, thinking that the bigwig was inviting her to a restaurant, but he had other plans. I'm inviting you to visit me. Home, how would you like that? The man asked. If you want so much, I can come to your house, the girl agreed. Then I'll send a driver for you tonight, okay? All right. Chuckles. She disconnected, and Wilson looked at the extinguished screen of the cell phone and thought, why is he so eager to see Lillian? He thought, and the thought made him feel kind of funny. The man pressed a button on the landline phone to summon the receptionist. Maggie, come in here. A secretary appeared in the doorway with a notepad in hand. Can you please order a catered meal to my house by 8 and make sure it's top shelf? You're having dinner alone? With a girl. Also red wine, dry. Oh, and flowers. You do the bouquet. I'm relying on your taste, which has never failed me in my memory. I'm trying, Wilson. Maggie smiled. I hope so. Wilson wanted Lillian to enjoy his visit, and, what was more, he was looking forward to the rest of the evening. The rest of the day was spent solving production issues. When he arrived home, the waiter was bustling in the living room, setting the food brought from the restaurant on the table, setting the table and waiting for the owner. Everything is ready, he reported to Wilson. Then you can be free. The man took a bill out of his wallet and handed it to the waiter, for your labors and efforts. After thanking the owner of the apartment, the catering employee left the apartment. Wilson looked around the set table. Several beautifully arranged appetizers looked very presentable. The man lifted the cloche, from under which the appetizing meat and vegetables appeared. A bottle of wine stood open. The waiter had taken care of that too. Fully satisfied with the service and the choice of dishes, Wilson glanced at the bouquet. Maggie often picked out flowers for him for various events. Her impeccable taste had never let the director down. But this time she had surpassed herself. Magnificent white roses in purple wrapping looked simple, but very beautiful and romantic. Wilson waited for Lillian in high spirits and in anticipation of a great evening. When the doorbell rang, he looked at himself in the mirror for a few seconds, assessing his appearance. Then he opened the door. Lillian stood on the threshold. She was wearing a tight red dress, her hair was gathered in a high ponytail, and she was holding a small purse. How seductive she is, Wilson thought to himself, and said aloud, "It's very nice to see you, Lillian. Come in, don't be shy, please." The girl went into the living room, noting that Wilson had prepared for the meeting. The owner of the apartment invited her to make herself at home and moved a chair, inviting her to sit at the table. "You know, Lillian, I've lived alone for so long, but dining alone is so boring." "I don't like to eat alone either," she agreed, watching him pour wine into glasses. Lillian noted that this time Wilson ordered her favorite red dry wine. "Can I ask you a question?" Lillian asked cautiously. "Of course, about whatever you please," exclaimed the master. "Who did all the cooking? Do you have a housekeeper?" "Oh no, I don't have a housekeeper. I have a woman who comes in once a week to do women's housework. Clean, cook something, wash, take things to the laundry and dry cleaners. And this is food from the restaurant." Lillian tried the rack of lamb and was delighted. "Delicious meat. It's delicious, tender," and then she added, "but I can't cook at all. The limit of my culinary talents is a sausage and cheese sandwich and boiled murphyons." They both laughed. Lillian did not feel awkward at all. Wilson had no intention of saying that a woman should know how to run a household and cook soup. "That's not surprising," said the man. "Forgive me, Lillian, but I did some research on you before we met again. I know that you were raised in an orphanage, so I understand why you can't cook. Girls are usually taught by their mothers and grandmothers, but you—" "Yeah, my mother left me at the hospital. I don't know why she didn't like me so much." Lillian shook her head, making a sad face. "It's in the past," Lillian. Wilson said. "Let's not be sad. Better, ask me something else. I like answering your questions so much." "Yes, I have a question." Lillian put the knife aside and blotted her lips with a napkin. "You are a wealthy man, not poor I would even say, but why do you live in an apartment? Rich people prefer to have a big house with a garden and a garage for 2 or 3 cars, and you have only an apartment, though very big. Doesn't the answer to your question lie on the surface?" Wilson looked around the living room, then looked into Lillian's eyes. "I'm lonely. Sometimes in this apartment I feel like I'm in a huge cave. Even it's too big for one person. And if I had a house, say 600 square, what would I do there?" "No, you need a house if you have a big family, if you have relatives and guests. But an apartment is enough for me alone." "Doesn't anyone come to see you?" "Don't you have any relatives?" Lillian asked, sipping from her wine glass. "Unfortunately, no," Wilson answered. His tone suddenly became very trusting, and his eyes became sad again. "My parents died, my father of cancer, and my mother. My mother died of longing for my father." "Did they have such a strong love?" wondered the girl. "Yes, they were very fond of each other and of me. I've been alone ever since." Wilson tried to smile. "If I had a family, I would build a big house where everyone would have their own room, and everyone would gather for lunches and dinners in the big living room." "I'd like a big house," Lillian said dreamily, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you still have a long way to go," Wilson said encouragingly. "Lillian, can I ask you something now?" "Sure. Can we speak to you on a first-name basis?" Lillian laughed. She had been expecting some kind of trick question, but he had only wanted to simplify the form of communication. "Of course, I wanted to suggest it myself, but I was too shy to." "Why don't we dance?" the man suggested. Let's, Lillian corrected herself. He pressed a button on the remote, and beautiful slow music came from somewhere in the ceiling. Wilson put his arm around the girl and put his arm around her waist. They began to move in a slow dance. Lillian felt his fingers gently stroking her back, going lower. "Will you stay with me tonight?" he asked. "Yes," Lillian answered quietly, She was prepared for something like this to happen after dinner. Wilson was quite a nice man, she even liked him. As she danced with her new suitor, she thought about how beneficial a relationship with Wilson could be for her. Everything that had happened this evening suggested that he was looking for a long-term relationship, not a one-night stand, and that was good for Lillian. The most important thing Lillian had learned was that he was lonely, and lonely people were easy to manipulate. The main thing is to give them what they need: tenderness, care, affection, and love. When she woke up in the morning, Lillian slid out of bed quietly, so as not to wake her lover, and headed for the bathroom. On the way, she poured herself some wine and sipped it, glancing out the window. From the height of the 18th floor, the city seemed simply huge, and the cars rushing along the capital's highways toy-like. The girl put the glass on the table and locked herself in the bathroom. Standing under the jets of warm water, she thought that the first step had been taken. Wilson was delighted with her. He couldn't tear himself away from Lillian all night, whispering various affectionate words and telling her she was delightful. Who would doubt it, thought the girl to herself. When she, wrapped in a big fluffy towel, came out of the bathroom, Wilson was already in the kitchen. He was making coffee. "Good morning," he greeted Lillian and kissed her. "You make coffee in a pot?" she wondered. "What's the coffee machine for?" "I like it the old-fashioned way," the man replied. "It seems to me that this ominously rumbling machine, like any soulless machine, cannot make coffee with a soul. Don't you agree?" "Maybe," Lillian said uncertainly. She drank her coffee and started to leave. "Why don't you stay a while?" Wilson asked. "I can't." She moved closer to him and kissed him, her whole appearance showing that she was upset about the upcoming parting. All good things must come to an end. It's a classic of the genre. "Why not? You don't have to." He held Lillian close to him and looked into her eyes. "Let's have dinner at the restaurant tonight." "All right." Chuckles. "Then I expect you at 8 o'clock there, and at the same table," he said. "I'll make a reservation." Wilson walked down the corridor of his office. There were a few employees walking around with papers and folders, talking on the phone. Today he was late and arrived at work by lunchtime, but life in the office without him had not stopped. Nothing had fallen apart or stalled. He was pleased to realize that all the processes in the company were on the right track. Each employee knew his job. "Good afternoon," Wilson. Maggie's secretary stood up from her desk. "There have been a lot of calls this morning. Your suppliers asked you to call back, and you have a meeting with a partner from New York tonight. You asked me to remind you." Wilson thought for a moment. He'd made a date with Lillian. He would have to cancel the meeting with the girl. The partners had wanted to meet with him for a long time, but every time the negotiations were postponed. And Wilson wanted to sign a good contract with them for the supply of paint. "Maggie, confirm the meeting with the partners and bring me a list of those who called since morning with a note of what for," he said to the secretary. He entered his office, and a minute later a secretary came in with papers. She was saying something, but Wilson did not hear the girl. He thought about the fact that Lillian would consider him a cheat. He had made an appointment at the restaurant and couldn't come. Yes, he stared at the secretary Marina with a blank stare. "Leave everything on the desk and go." Wilson dialed Lillian's number, feeling anxious to hear her voice. "Hello," she answered. "Lillian, you know I have a negotiation tonight. It's a very important meeting." "So there will be no dinner at the restaurant?" Lillian said it in such a distressed voice that Wilson felt guilty. "Yes, unfortunately, I'll be late." He hesitated for a moment and added, "Lillian, let's do it this way. You come to my place, order whatever you want, and I'll come a little later. How about that?" "Well, all right." Lillian's voice still sounded resentful. "What should I order? Do you want something special?" No, order what you want. I'll send a driver to pick you up, and he'll give you the keys to the apartment. Don't be shy. Have as much fun as you want." Wilson was silent for a while, and then added, "Kisses." With a sigh of relief, satisfied that he'd handled things so well with Lillian, he asked the secretary to call Sam to him. A few minutes later, the assistant was in the principal's office. "Hello, Sam. There were a few missed calls from you yesterday. Is something wrong?" Yes, Wilson, I tried to call you, but you were out of range. I was busy. Let's get down to business, the director interrupted him. We're on Amelie's trail, the deputy began his report. Is she alive? Wilson's heart was beating so hard it seemed ready to jump out of his chest. The man loosened his tie and undid the top button of his blue shirt. Did you find her? Where is she? Let me get this straight, Sam asked him. Go ahead, but don't drag it out. Yesterday, my officers found a drug dealer, just a small-time dealer. This guy recognized Amelie from a photo. He said he'd sold her drugs himself, but it was a long time ago. He hadn't seen her in 3 years. Amelie's been unknown for 10 years, and about 3 years ago she was seen by a drug dealer, right? That's right. He said she was on the needle a lot. Sometimes he'd even lend her money because he knew she'd come back. What's next? Don't drag it out. Wilson waited for detailed information from Sam, but he couldn't say anything else. About 3 years ago, he sold her some dope, hasn't seen her since. I had to shake the guy up a little bit, and then he cracked. Anyway, I've got the address where Amelie and her buddies were. Permission to go to the address and check it out? I wanted to do it yesterday, but I couldn't reach you. Go, Sam. Yes, Wilson approved the assistant's suggestion. And as soon as you find out something, come to me. Got it. I'll do it. For the rest of the day, Wilson could think of nothing else. He had a renewed, fading confidence that his sister would be found. Lillian found Paul drunk. He was sitting next to the table, spreading herring on a newspaper. Empty bottles were piled under the table. Lillian hadn't come home last night, and Paul had gotten drunk out of jealousy and longing. His wild imagination was painting pictures of his girlfriend tumbling around in bed with a fat, greasy man. He was pawing her with fingers shaped like gherkins, salivating over her body with puffy lips, and she was wriggling in his arms. Imagining it was unbearable. Shot after shot, Paul emptied one bottle, then uncorked a second, a third. Finding the guy in such a state, Lillian freaked out. Why aren't you at work? She yelled at Paul. Are you out of your mind, you asshole? The girl began to slap his cheeks, trying to bring him to his senses, and then she grabbed the kettle and poured water from it over Paul's head. The boy began to come to his senses, his eyes blurred as he looked at Lillian, trying to understand what was happening. Oh, she's here. Did you have a good time with the fat man? He muttered. Paul, come to your senses. I'm doing everything I can so that you and I can have a prosperous future, and you decide to drink yourself to death before the bright days are over? I'm not in your plans, I'm alone, I'm on my own, the boy mumbled. He reached for the bottle, took it in his hand and realized it was empty. Do you have a drink? I'm going to hit you over the head with this bottle. For God's sake. Lillian sat down next to him on the couch, her arms wrapped around her head. She needed more than ever to be calm and centered. Wilson, her goldfish, and he had taken the bait, and here Paul was making a circus with horses. Go get a bottle, the guy asked her. Yeah, I'm on my way. Lillian took off her dress, changed into a tracksuit and started to clean up the mess made by her friend. My head is splitting, Paul groaned. Go and get drunk yourself, if you can't do it any other way, she told him. Give me the money. Paul was at the door within a minute. I gave you yesterday. Run out of. Lillian cursed, pulled some bills out of her purse, and shoved him out the door. She got some water in a bucket and started scrubbing the floor. Paul began to come to his senses after he'd had a hangover. He stopped throwing accusations at Lillian, being angry with her and rude. On the contrary, he even felt guilty. The girl cleaned up and ordered a pizza. She was hungry, and Paul could use something to eat besides the herring on the plate. Lillian didn't hurry to talk to him, showing him that she was resentful of him. Paul was the first to start the conversation. Well, I'm sorry. I was so lonely. I kept picturing you with that man. When are you going to stop treating me like your property? When are you going to start realizing that I'm on a mission? I need this man. He's going to make us rich and wealthy. But you've already slept with him, Lillian. The boy exclaimed. It shouldn't bother you. All you have to think about is that soon we'll have our own place and lots of money. That's what you should be thinking about right now, Paul. Get it into your head. Yes, it's my fault. I'm sorry, Paul admitted. I'll try not to think about the bad things, but don't leave me, please. You fool. Your mind. Lillian put her arms around him and stroked his hair, his cheek, his neck. I can't get away from you. We've been together for so many years. Paul squirmed and cried like a baby, tucking himself into the girl's shoulder. A black Jeep pulled up to the entrance of a paneled 5-story building in a residential neighborhood. It was an ordinary multi-unit building, the kind of which were built in the 70s. Old ladies were sitting in the driveway, talking peacefully. I think it's here, Sam said. I'm going to go talk to the grandmothers, and you stay here. The 2 security officers remained in the car while Sam approached the pensioners. Good day, grandmothers, he greeted the old ladies. How is your health? Seeing a handsome man in a beautiful black suit and tie, the neighbors smiled. They had been sitting on the bench since morning and had already had time to discuss everything and anything, and at least a new person had joined their company. Yes, what kind of health we have now, the grandmothers readily answered the young man's question. Our legs ache, our heart aches, we can hardly walk to the store. Sam gestured to one of the employees and he jumped out of the car, running up to the supervisor. Go to the store, buy some groceries, milk, good sausage, cheese, fruit. You see what's best. He handed the guard some bills, and he hurried to the nearest supermarket. Sam sat down on the bench next to the old ladies. And the children? Grandchildren? Why don't they help you? Wilson's assistant continued the conversation with the pensioners. No way. They have their own business now, replied one of the grandmothers. That's right, confirmed the other. When they were little, they couldn't live without their grandmothers. They hung around here all day long, but now they don't even show their eyes. Business. The guard returned with bags full of groceries. Sam handed the old ladies the delicacies. Don't be upset. Here's some presents for you. Help yourself. The old ladies gasped in amazement, not knowing what to say. Come on, son. What are we in for? You, grandmothers, have lived such a long and hard life, done so much good to people. This is just a drop in the sea of gratitude that we, our generation, can express to you. Take it, don't be shy. The old ladies happily took a bag of groceries from Sam's hands, looking at the contents with amazement. Grannies, can you help me? Sam asked the old ladies. With what, son? Tell us what we can do to help. The satisfied grandmothers eagerly responded. You wouldn't happen to know a Stephen Cooper, would you? If memory serves, he lived in this building. Who doesn't know him? The cursed fiend. The old women were indignant. This is where he lives. He gives no rest to anyone. He's been keeping the whole neighborhood in fear for years. They say he's a drug addict and a murderer. The more the grandmothers talked about Stephen Cooper, the rounder and rounder their eyes got. Sam realized that a lot of what they said was fantasy, but he continued to listen intently. There's no life in this, Stephen. Did you call the police? Sam asked, more to keep up the enthusiasm of Cooper's roommates. The policeman came, the police came. Nobody can control him. Every day, some suspicious guys and girls go to his house. Music is blaring, and even fights and noise. We call the police, and they come and look at it and say, Stephen is a landlord. He can invite anyone he wants. It's a mess. Sam shook his head. Did you happen to see this girl, or did she come to visit him with any suspicious guys and girls? The grandmothers began to look closely at Amelie's picture. One of the neighbors even took her glasses out of her bag and put them on the bridge of her nose to better see her face in the picture. I think I've seen this girl, said the old lady with glasses. Only her hair was multicolored, purple, pink, and her eyes were painted like a, sorry God, prostitute. Are you sure? Sam asked. That's right, that's her, confirmed the second grandmother. She was always chewing gum, passing by, never saying hello. That's definitely her. She used to go to Stephen's place all the time, and they used to spend the night there with the whole gang of their drug addicts. How long had you seen her? The man continued to ask. It's been a long time, 3 years since I've seen her, the old woman with glasses tried to remember. She was taken away by ambulance, exclaimed another grandmother. Have you forgotten? She also threw a knife at some guy from their company. I remember that day well. I was hanging laundry on the balcony and saw everything. What did you see? It was summer, it was hot, the windows were open, and you could hear everything. They were having some kind of fight, noise, rumbling. And then she flew into the stairwell and started waving her knife at the guy. She waved it, and then she fell backwards, rolling her eyes. So the neighbor called the psych ward, said the girl was crazy. What's next? Sam asked. Then the ambulance came, they tied her up and took her away. I said to my neighbor, what will happen to the boy now? What boy? Sam didn't get it. The guy she was waving the knife around in front of? No, the old woman waved her hand at him. The girl had a boy, a little boy, about 2 years old. She carried him around with her all the time. Grandmothers, you're confusing me. Sam spoke to the old women affectionately, afraid to frighten them. He felt that at this moment a secret was being revealed that would help him find the boss's sister. Wait a minute, said another old woman to her friend. I'll explain everything myself. The girl from your picture was always with the kid, and he called her mom, so he was her son. And when they took her to the asylum, the boy was in that brothel. I know that for a fact. How do you know? Sam asked. So I'm sitting on the bench or on my balcony. I wouldn't have missed it if he'd run off somewhere. And after my mother was taken away by ambulance, nobody ever saw him again. Sam thought for a moment. The information was so shocking, unbelievable, and unexpected that he needed time to digest it all in his head and report back to his boss. Thank you, grandmothers, he said to the old ladies, saying goodbye. Don't get sick. Thank you and have a good day. And don't you be sick, dear man. The grandmothers gave Sam a look and hurried home to sort out the gift bags. The man walked to the car. He ordered one of the guards to go with him, the other to sit in the car and watch the entrance, so that Cooper wouldn't inadvertently leave. The guys went up to the 3rd floor, stopped at the peeling door. The bell didn't work. Sam pounded on the door with his fist. Who's there? A man's voice sounded. Open the gas works. Open up. You have a leak. We need to shut off the pipe, the security chief said loudly. I don't have any leaks, said a voice behind the door, but the lock clanked and the door opened. The guard burst sharply into the apartment, grabbed Cooper and dragged him into the room, squeezing his throat tightly. Where's Amelie? Sam asked him, holding a gun to Stephen Cooper's head. What? What Amelie? The boy babbled. Where's this girl? The man yelled angrily, poking the boy's nose into a picture of the boss's sister. He stopped his gaze at the photograph. Cooper's eyes showed that he recognized the girl. Frightened, he began to talk incoherently. I don't know. I haven't seen her in ages. Be specific, Sam shouted, jabbing the muzzle of his gun into his forehead, or I'll put a bullet in him and I won't even think about it. I haven't seen her for a long time. The last time she was there was about 3 years ago. She got mad, demanded a dose, attacked my friend with a knife, so the paramedics took her away. Where they took her, Sam continued to threaten the guy with the gun. Where is she? I don't know. Maybe she's dead. Cooper didn't have time to finish before he was hit in the stomach, bent in half, and groaned. Where's the boy? Where is her son, I ask you? Continued the interrogation by the head of the guard. What's it got to do with me? My friend said we didn't need him, and they wouldn't let Alinka out of the asylum anyway. We took him to the kindergarten and left him there at the gate. What were we supposed to do with him? What was the boy's name? Murphy. Sort of. Who's his father? I wouldn't know. I've held a candle to it. Amelie was high on drugs and sleeping around. Sam shoved Cooper off with force, and he fell to the floor, crawling backward. Sam hurried back to the office to tell everything he'd learned to his boss, but Maggie's secretary said Wilson wasn't there. He's negotiating with partners from New York, she told the head of security. I booked a table at the restaurant myself today. And then he's going straight home. He said he wouldn't be coming back to the office today. Sam dialed Wilson, but the director's phone was out of range. There were still a few hours before the end of the workday. Sam decided to take the initiative and try to continue his investigation on his own. Maggie, can you prepare me addresses and phone numbers of all orphanages and boarding schools in the city and in the region? I can. Is it urgent? The girl asked. It's very urgent, Maggie, the head of security, said in a mysterious, almost conspiratorial voice, which made the secretary laugh. I will, and I'll call you when it's ready, she said. Half an hour later, Maggie emailed Sam a list of orphanages. There were few of them, no more than a dozen. Now it was necessary to act together with Wilson, but the head of security still couldn't reach him. And Wilson, after dinner with his partners, hurried home. There Lillian, the girl he wanted to see more and more every hour, was waiting for him. He found Lillian in the parlor. The girl looked very seductive in a silk pink robe with loose hair and bare feet. She had ordered a pizza and was eating it, staring at the flat screen of a large television. Wilson? Is that you? She asked, not getting up from the couch when she heard the sound of the door opening. I hope you missed me, the man replied and plopped down on the couch next to the girl. She started kissing and stroking her, running her hand under the thin fabric of her robe as the phone rang. Wait a minute, I have to answer it. Trying to calm his excited breathing, he answered the phone. Lillian saw his face become serious, even stern. Come to my house right away. That's it. I'm waiting, Wilson said and disconnected the phone. Did something happen? Lillian asked. Yes, he stood up and tucked his shirt into his pants. Lillian, there's a man coming to see me, and I need to talk to him. Could you stay in the bedroom for a while? The girl grabbed a pizza box, a started bottle of wine, and departed. Sam arrived quickly. Lillian heard him enter the living room. Wilson was very excited. They spoke softly, but the girl could hear almost the whole conversation. So Amelie has a son, the man said thoughtfully, as the head of security told him everything he had learned. It goes like this. Where do you think he might be? Wilson asked. I think the boy could have ended up in an orphanage and then an orphanage. I made an extract of all orphanages with phone numbers and addresses. I was going to call and visit, but I was waiting for your instructions. That's right, you'll do it tomorrow morning. And how to find Amelie. Wilson's mind was spinning with the information he had received. It had been almost 10 years since his sister had disappeared, and he had no hope of finding out anything about her. It's easier with this one, Sam said confidently. There are 2 clinics in town. One private, the other regular, state-run. Since Amelie was taken from a drug den, they couldn't put her in the private clinic. Who would pay for her? So we're looking for traces of your sister in a psychiatric hospital. You're right, Wilson said thoughtfully. There must be some records, some documentation of Amelie's enrollment. The man was silent for a while, looking out the window at the cars floating down the avenue, the garlands of lights and the glowing windows of the houses, and then he said, So I have a nephew. That still has to be proven, Sam said. If Amy's in the asylum, she could be disinherited in absentia and the boy adopted. That's the worst-case scenario, in which case we'd never find him. Any lawyer will tell you there's adoption secrecy. To hell with lawyers, Wilson exclaimed. Money makes all the difference. No matter how good the foster parents are, if you offer them a lot of money, they'll give up the child without even thinking. Amelie, Amai, why didn't you come to me as your own brother? Sam left after receiving instructions from his boss the next day. Lillian's plans for a romantic evening ruined, Wilson said he needed to be alone and sent her home. She stormed into the room, angry as a fury. She kicked off her shoes and flopped down on the couch, sinking into a pillow. What are you doing? Paul asked, not realizing what was going on. What's wrong? It happened, you old goat. Lillian said angrily. He thinks it's okay to do this to me if he wants to. He calls me. If he wants to, here's Lillian's car. Go home. I thought you said he was in love with you." "It's all wrong. It's all wrong. It's all wrong." "What's wrong, Lillian? Explain it properly." Paul tried to hug her, but the girl threw his arm away. "Why don't you have a drink?" "Come on." Lillian downed a full shot of vodka and grumbled. "Anyway, it turns out he has a sister and a nephew. I thought he was lonely, no problems. And now it turns out no matter how hard you try, even if you fall in love with him, the heirs by blood will claim his money." "Where are they?" Paul asked. "Ouch, it's kind of a murky story. The sister's in a mental institution and the nephew's in an orphanage." "Wow," the guy whistled. "Sam, Wilson's right-hand man, is going to find them both tomorrow," Lillian said. "Paul, my plan is falling apart, and I've worked so hard. What do I do?" "Have a drink? Maybe you'll calm down." "Relax." Paul handed her a shot glass. "I don't want it. Drink it yourself." Lillian refused. She decided that she couldn't let Wilson go. She had to remind herself, and she would call him tomorrow. The next morning, as soon as he entered his office, Wilson called his secretary. He had been up all night thinking about his sister. Thanks to Sam, at least now it was clear which direction to take, where to look for Emily. "Maggie, connect me with the head doctor of the psychoneurological dispensary," he asked the secretary. "Okay, Wilson." After a minute, the man picked up the phone. The chief physician of the city mental institution was on the line. "I'd like to know information about a patient of yours," he said, introducing himself and briefly explaining the situation. "Amelie Brown, do you have one?" The doctor said they were holding a girl who called herself Alina, but he could not give that information over the phone. "Come in person," the doctor suggested. Half an hour later, the man was already sitting in the office of the head doctor of the psychiatric dispensary, and Wilson was showing him a picture of his missing sister. "Yeah, she came in 3 years ago in a terrible state. She was in acute drug-induced psychosis." "Why didn't you look for her family?" "Our remit is to treat patients, not to find loved ones. Maybe that's why. Also, I was not working at the hospital at the time, so I can't answer your questions in more detail." "Can I see her?" Wilson asked. "We can do that. She's stable. Just try not to worry her too much." "I'll try," Wilson promised. They walked together to the park in the courtyard of the hospital. Amelie was sitting on a bench under a lilac bush. Wilson was struck by how awful she looked. Her loose hair was tangled, strewn across her shoulders. Her face was pale, and the blue circles under her eyes told him that she was on a lot of medication. Dressed in a hospital gown, Amelie swayed from side to side, moving her lips. She seemed to be talking to someone. Wilson slowly made his way towards her. As he approached the girl, he crouched down in front of her and called softly, "Amelie, it's you, sis." She turned her head, looked at her brother. "Wilson, you came." "I knew you would come," Amelie said in a weak voice, and suddenly grabbed Wilson by the shoulders, clung to him with a dead grip, and began to say, "Save my son, save Murphy. He's been stolen. Find him," she said. "I'll definitely find him. Don't worry." Wilson tried to reassure his sister. "They're already looking for him. And I'll take you away from here soon, and we'll live together again." "With Murphy?" the girl asked hopefully. "Of course the boy will be with us too. Everything will be fine. You just wait and don't worry." On the way back to the office, Wilson couldn't get rid of a pang of anxiety and pity for his sister. What had happened to her, the fact that her life had gone down a crooked path, he considered only himself to be to blame. He hadn't looked, hadn't been able to see the first danger signals in time, but now he would make it right. My cell phone rang in my pocket. It was Lillian. Wilson answered it. "Yes, Lillian." "Wilson, I've been worried about you all night. Something's happened to you, and I don't know how to support you," Lillian said in an affectionate voice. "Do you want me to come over tonight, stay with you, and talk to you?" "Yes, Lillian, come. You have the keys." Wilson decided that the girl in this story could be useful to him, and in general today he did not want to be alone. In the meantime, Sam was making phone calls and driving around the orphanages. It was more difficult for him to find Amélie's son. There was no information, no picture. All he knew was that the child had been left near the kindergarten and the address of the institution, but he could have run away and gotten to the orphanage from another place. Besides, the directors of the orphanages were not very eager to make contact. Finally, at one of the orphanages, he managed to find a boy of 5 years old, whose name was Murphy. He came to us in a terrible state, the principal said, after Sam had placed a puffy envelope of money on her desk. He could hardly speak at all, but he told us his name and kept calling for his mother. The police had all the information on him. Why they didn't find his mother, I don't know. The boy's mother is in treatment, Sam said, not going into detail about Amélie and her drug-addicted past. But the child has an uncle who is a very wealthy man. Looking ahead, if this is the child we're looking for, how can we get him out of here? Since there is no official record of the boy's relationship to his alleged, as you say, uncle, it will not be easy to do so. But as I understand it, we can do a DNA test between the nephew and his uncle. The test would prove they're related. It is true, but the procedure is not quick, and then there will be inspections by the guardianship service and courts, and this is all very long and does not always guarantee a positive result. In court, they will definitely look into how it happened that the uncle did not know about the existence of his nephew. I would advise you to consider adoption. Here is a list of requirements and documents that need to be collected. Offer the uncle of the boy to think about it. Thank you, Sam thanked the principal. When he got back to the office, he told Wilson everything. Hi, darling, Lillian threw herself on Wilson's neck as soon as he entered the apartment door. I'm waiting for you. I ordered dinner from our restaurant. Okay, the man said, taking the girl's hands off his shoulders. But we need to talk. Something's wrong, the girl stammered. Happened, and it's very important to me. They sat down on the couch and Wilson began his story. Lillian's eyes widened at what she heard. Today I saw my sister in the psych ward. In her condition, no one will give the child to her, and I don't want the boy to live in an orphanage. I want him to be my heir. I'll give him the company when he grows up and gets an education. I see you've thought of everything years in advance. Lillian shook her head. How about that? Wilson exclaimed. I have no children of my own, and probably never will. Who will carry on my work? But you could meet a girl, and, I did, Wilson said, and looked into her eyes. I met you and I fell in love. I wanted to get to know you, to see if you'd love me, if we could have children, but things turned out the way they did. I don't understand you. Lillian Wilson took her hand. The only way I can take the boy away is to adopt him or take him into foster care. But children are almost never given to single-parent families. It's considered that a child should have a mother as well as a father. Lillian didn't understand what her lover was getting at. I'm asking you to be my wife so we can take the boy in. I've thought of everything. We will live together. You will love him for sure. You are kind, sweet, funny. Are you proposing to me? Lillian's eyes lit up with joy. Yes, but it needs to be done very quickly so that the adoption paperwork can be started. Aren't we going to have a wedding? The girl asked sadly. Lillian, everything will happen, but only later, I promise you. I agree, said Lillian. After all, this was what she wanted, even without a wedding, but she would become the businessman's lawful wife. 2 weeks later, Lillian was fidgeting in front of Paul, showing her new passport. Look, Brana Lilian Nikolaevna, there's the marriage registration stamp. It worked, Paul. The guy sighed, looking at the document. So what now? He asked his friend. Now it's just a matter of getting rid of Wilson and his boy. What's the kid got to do with it? I don't get it. And because he's the heir. To eliminate all surprises, we must make sure that he did not exist. After all, he was not in Vidya's life for 5 years, and then he appeared. By the way, we're taking him home from the orphanage tomorrow. How do you think you'll get rid of it? That's the second thing. We have to settle things with Wilson first. Lillian rummaged through her purse and pulled out a small vial. Here, I got a powerful sleeping pill. I'll put it in his wine tomorrow at dinner. Then we'll take care of the boy." Wilson was happy. Everything was going very well, taking Murphy out of the orphanage even faster than he had expected. The boy looked around in his uncle's apartment. A room was already prepared for him with toys, which made the child delighted. Murphy didn't speak much, but you could see from his expression that he was glad. In the evening, Lillian, Wilson, and Murphy settled down in the living room for a celebratory dinner in the boy's honor. "Your mother will join us soon," Wilson said to her nephew. "In the meantime, obey Aunt Lillian in everything." The girl shuddered. She shuddered at the word aunt. After eating, the child ran to his room to play, and Wilson poured wine into glasses. "Darling, I forgot the cheese in the kitchen. Please bring it," Lillian asked. While the man fulfilled her request, she threw some pills into his glass. After sitting at the table for a while longer, they went to the bedroom. Lillian waited for the pills to take effect, while Wilson read a story to his nephew in the nursery. Suddenly, she heard a noise. Running into the boy's room, Lillian saw Wilson lying on the floor. He was dead. Sam took charge of the funeral arrangements. It was very cold in the cemetery. Lillian wrapped her scarf around her coat collar. The north wind was blowing through her. Paul leisurely paced around Lillian's late husband's apartment. "What a place. People live," he said. Paul wasn't sober again, but Lillian thought it was for the best. They had to get rid of the boy today, and Paul had been hysterical lately, afraid of something. "Sit down. Don't loom," the girl ordered him. "Have you figured out where we're going to take the boy? Maybe back to the orphanage?" "No, that's not an option," Lillian shook her head. Wilson had started the paperwork on him. "I don't know if he's been to a notary public in time to include the baby in the will, so we have to get rid of him for good." "What do you mean?" Forever the boy didn't understand. "So that he's no longer in this world at all. Let him go to his uncle." "And his mother? Won't she look for her son?" "She's in a mental institution, and she's not likely to come out of it. Besides, she's terminated her parental rights," said Lillian. "Paul, pull yourself together. We have one last step to take, and I will inherit Wilson's estate as his legal wife. We'll sell it all, his company, his real estate, his car, and we'll leave. No one will ever find us." "I'm a little scared, the baby." "Come on, no more whining. No more drinking." Lillian took the glass from his hands and poured the wine into the sink. "We'll take the boy to the cemetery. His uncle wanted him there so badly. Let the two of them lie there together." Snow was falling outside the window. It hadn't stopped snowing for the past 2 days, covering the city and its surroundings with meter-high drifts. Sam watched the machinery working in the yard of his house, carefully clearing the snowy snow from the area. Loyal to his boss, he decided that he would definitely finish the work started by Wilson Georgievich. Today he picked Amelie up from the psychiatric dispensary. At discharge, the doctor gave him a prescription for medication and said that the girl would have to be observed on an outpatient basis for a few more months. Sam promised that he would see to it. He promised he would take care of the girl while standing at her older brother's grave. In 10 years of searching, the boss's sister had become almost family to him. Amelie came out of the bathroom with a towel over her head in his terrycloth robe. "Do you want something to eat?" he asked her. "No, I want to see where Wilson is buried," Amelie said. "It's dark already." "Never mind, will you drive me?" The girl felt that she absolutely had to go to the cemetery as soon as possible. "I will," Sam answered. "There are some clothes in the room. I bought some yesterday, but I don't know if they'll fit." A few minutes later, Amelie came out to him wearing new jeans and a warm sweater. Putting on her jacket and hat, she said, "I'm ready to go, shall we?" Sam shone his flashlight through the snowdrifts, illuminating the path for himself and Amelie. Finally, they saw a fresh mound covered with wreaths and carnations. Above the grave was a cross with Wilson's picture on it. Amelie stroked the image of her brother. He was young and smiling in the picture. That was how she remembered him, despite the many years of separation. Suddenly, there was a strange sound behind the cross. like something rustling in a snowdrift. Amelie flinched, startled, and Sam held her close and shined the flashlight on her. There was a baby lying in a snowdrift. They rushed to him. "My God, where did he come from?" the girl exclaimed. Sam took the boy in his arms and began to rub his pale cheeks. He shined the flashlight into the child's face, and Amelie was stunned. The ground swam out from under her feet. "Sam, this is my son, Murphy," she said. "I see, let's hurry up and get in the car." They hurried to the parking lot where they had left the car. On the way, the boy woke up, opened his eyes. "Maybe the hospital?" Sam asked Amelie uncertainly. "No, let's go home," she said. "He needs to be warmed and fed." "My boy, you are alive, thank God." She kept kissing his cheeks, rubbing his chilled hands, stroking his head, and thinking with horror that if she and Sam hadn't gone to the cemetery that late evening, she would never have seen her son alive again. Sam had other things on his mind. He didn't like Lillian right away. There was something sweetly deceitful about her, but he didn't dare tell his boss. Who was he to advise Wilson? Sam simply decided that he would watch this girl from the sidelines and take the necessary measures at the first danger. But not in time. He was pretty sure his wife was involved in his boss's death, but there was no proof. And now that they'd found Wilson's nephew, mercilessly dumped in a snowdrift in the cemetery, it all made sense to Sam. At home, after making sure the boy was okay, he called the police. Paul was nervous, while Lillian calmly sipped wine from her glass. "Are you sure we won't be thought of?" her boyfriend asked her. "Stop being hysterical," she swore at him. "What's done is done. Now we have to think about how to get the inheritance and get out of here. I'd go to the sea in some hot country, bask in the sun under the rustling waves, enjoy delicious restaurant dishes." Her reverie was interrupted by the doorbell. The boy and the girl looked at each other. "Who is it?" Paul asked fearfully. "We'll see about that," she set her wine glass aside and headed for the door. When she looked at the intercom screen, she saw Sam's face. What the hell is that guy doing here? The girl opened the door. On the threshold stood the head of her late husband's security, followed by several policemen. "Lillian Brown, you are charged with the murder of your husband and the attempted murder of a minor," Murphy Brown said, one of the police officers. "Pack up, you'll have to come with us." 6 months had passed. Music played in the city park. Couples and moms with strollers strolled through the alleys. Sam and Amelie happily watched Murphy ride the merry-go-round with horses, elephants, and dragons. The girl was absolutely happy to see her baby, whom she had almost lost forever. "Murphy, hold on tight," Sam shouted to him, waving his hand, and added with a glance at the boy's mother, "We don't want him to fall off." "Don't worry, he's holding on tight. And anyway, nothing bad is going to happen to us now," Amelie said, stroking her belly. A few months later, Murphy had a